Hello and welcome to the final in this mini-series on demonstrating impact. This is from CVS Brent's Monitoring and Evaluation project funded by the City Bridge Trust. This video will cover how to tackle the monitoring and evaluation parts of a funding application. The previous two videos in this series show you how to develop the systems and tools needed to do this, so please have a look at those if you haven't already. Almost all funding applications ask you to show how you will measure change, but the questions can be worded in various ways and some are a bit sneaky. If you've already been monitoring and evaluating, you can also include your results in other questions, particularly those about evidence of need. How do you know there is a need for this service? How do you know what you're doing makes a difference? Why is your organisation best placed to deliver this service? How have beneficiaries been involved? That's a consultation question and we'll cover that later. Here's a quick summary of definitions before we really get going. Monitoring. That's information, often but not always numbers, you routinely collect about how many, how often, etc. Feedback. What your beneficiaries feed back to you about how they experienced your service. Outcomes measurement. An outcome is a change that comes about as a result of your intervention. Outcomes measurement is, wait for it, a way of measuring that change. Impact evidence. Impact is the bigger overall change. Evidence impact may call upon all your evaluation results, plus looking at wider research, national statistics, etc. There'll be more on this shortly. In the previous two videos, you started to put together a chart like this one. This is an example of the chart completed for an imaginary project working in one school with disadvantaged children at risk of underachievement. Note the inclusion of indicators. I never want you to get confused about the difference between outcomes and indicators because it doesn't really matter. But here you can see how indicators are relatively easy to measure. To make this chart into a complete evaluation framework, you would add the specific ways in which you intend to measure the results, when and how often you will do this, and who is involved. A quick revision on impact measurement because it can sometimes get neglected. Again, I don't want to confuse you, but funders will often refer to impact meaning all of the difference you make, or specifically meaning outcomes. They're usually happy to accept all kinds of information, the kind given out in these videos, as long as you directly address their questions, the questions in the application. If you are funded for a pilot project or even research, as happens sometimes, you may need to look more closely at ways to measure impact in this broad sense that I use it. Another way of thinking about impact is in your theory of change as you develop that. If you start out with what is the challenge, what is the inspiration behind your project and its planning, what is the issue that you hope will be resolved or that you will contribute to resolving, and then the measurement of how well you do at resolving that challenge is the impact you have had. Funding applications will often ask you to show how your beneficiaries or stakeholders or the local community have been involved in putting together your project and being part of its delivery. Many funders favour projects that are grassroots, led by the people for the people, but not every project can be this, so just have an awareness of ways you can increase in a real way the involvement of those who matter. There are various versions of this ladder, but don't let it panic you. It's not a test, but a useful way of looking at how you involve people. Most voluntary sector organisations are around the middle of the ladder, but anything you can do to move up the ladder will be well received. Involving beneficiaries in monitoring and evaluation is one way you can evidence their participation. Some small organisations start at the top because they grow out of community activity, and they need to be careful not to fall down the ladder as they grow and develop expertise and professionalise, so look out for that. One way to avoid this for charities is to maintain user involvement on your trustee board. They are the directors of the charity. I'm going to look at 2 funding application processes. The first is Awards for All. This is a lottery grant for up to £10,000. You need to have everything in place before you apply, but it is a good one for small or relatively new organisations, including those who haven't previously managed a budgeted project. Here you can see in the yellow highlighted areas the information you must include that relates to measuring difference in some way. What difference will your project make? Here, state your outcomes. You can link them with who will benefit from it. Here's a couple of examples, and I suggest you take a minute to have a look at these. Both need expanding on, but they're good opening sentences. What you would do in a real application is go into detail about how your project will achieve this change. Remember back to your theory of change. Because that involved quite a lot of text and quite a lot of thinking, I've included here a picture of a nice relaxing canal bank. The second part of this Awards for All question asked you about whether your project is established or new and how you will learn from it. Your monitoring and evaluation planning is part of your answer. If you are continuing or developing work done previously, you will already have evidence that what you do brings about real change. You may have examples of things you changed as a result of your learning from earlier work. Your project may even be the result of previous learning. How you will continue to learn is partly through monitoring and evaluation, and that's what you will need to do now. Funding priorities. Here you may be helped by referring again to your theory of change. Note that the question asks, how does your project meet our priorities? Priorities are things Awards for All want to fund. Projects that bring people together, improve communities, or help people reach their potential. First, determine which priorities your project meets. It doesn't have to be all of them. And then look at how. In other words, what is the process you use to support people so that the change happens? Here's 116 words on one of the priority areas. If your project met all 3 priority areas, obviously you would need to watch the word count, as it only allows 150 words for the whole question. But this is an example of the kind of thing you could do. I'll just give you a minute to read through this. Well, again, that was a lot of text, so here's a nice cat to look at. Okay, here's your consultation/participation question. This really needs thinking about before you do your application, preferably long before. What ongoing ways have you got to involve your beneficiaries? How do you consult with people affected by the work you do? Fortunately, the lottery, and Awards for All is a lottery fund, the lottery are good enough to give you a few ideas. They are very flexible and helpful when you're applying, and so do use them and get in touch with them directly if you have any questions. They're not trying to trick you. Here's a possible answer. Follow the links at the end of this video to get these slides. And after that, I suggest you have a piece of cake. Brent Council set out their priorities and ask in most of their small grant applications that you talk about how your activities will contribute to these results. Use the link at the bottom of this page to download the extended versions of each of these outcomes with examples of things you can do to meet the priorities. This really is worth doing, whether or not you intend to apply for a Brent grant. I strongly suggest you have a go at jotting down ways in which you meet with these priorities, using what you've learnt from the Awards for All work we've just covered. Don't invent a project just because there's funding available. For example, if there's a great fund for helping young people learn how to swim, but you work with elderly people on accessing the arts, the swim fund is not for you. On the other hand, if you work with young people on fitness and survival skills, possibly you could expand into swimming provision. However, is this part of your business or development plan? Is this something you've consulted on, or has it been requested in feedback that you've received? That would make a good basis for extending what you do. But don't just go that way because there happens to be a fund. Here's a summary on how to get started on addressing monitoring and evaluation questions in a funding application. Please complete the evaluation to get your materials by following this link, which is also given below the video, so you can easily pick it up. I really would be grateful. You can give feedback on all 3 videos in this series by following the same link, but skip sections 1 and 2 if you've only seen this one. The whole process, that's all 3, will take you about 4 minutes and 19 seconds. After that, have a cup of tea and a piece of cake. Thank you.